did a PhD in Italian studies, being Italian, now working in Genoa. And then she's a wonderful little story about how she actually ended up deciding to do a second PhD in looking at tamoxifen, which she's actually going to talk about, and its use in prevention of breast cancer and the North American breast cancer activist struggle to actually against chemoprevention. It's actually something I am really looking forward to and also expecting to learn a lot. Thank you, Grazia.
So thank you very much to the organizers of the workshop for organizing the workshop in the first instance and for inviting me. It's of course a pleasure to be here online with you today and to have the opportunity to share my presentation with you. My presentation focuses on the opposition by the grassroots organization Breast Cancer Action to the marketing and use of tamoxifen for the chemoprevention of breast cancer in healthy women considered at high risk to develop breast cancer. So this paper is part of my doctoral dissertation, which is still in progress, and whose main focus is the history of breast cancer action, or more broadly, the history of breast cancer in the United States at the turn of the 21st century, as seen through the eyes of a grassroots organization such as Breast Cancer Action. So in the next 25 minutes, I will try to give you an insight into the history of tamoxifen, then into the history of Breast Cancer Action. Then I will try to situate Breast Cancer Action work on tamoxifen as a preventative for breast cancer into the broader history of the women's health movement. And in the conclusions, I will try to analyze some similarities and differences between the context in which the women's health movement and Breast Cancer Action operated. So tamoxifen is a drug used to treat hormone-responsive breast cancer. Technically is a selective estrogen receptor modulator, which means that it has both an estrogenic and an anti-estrogenic effect. It was synthesized in 1962 by Dora Richardson, a chemist working at the Imperial Chemical Industries in the UK, and the company then became Zeneca and is now AstraZeneca. So IC had planned to make tamoxifen an anti-contraceptive, but trials didn't work, whereas results for the treatment of breast cancer were good. The drug was safe, was effective, and was well tolerated, especially in comparison with other synthetic hormones that had been used in the past for breast cancer. And interest in tamoxifen was great in the US, first of all, because of the need to show that Nixon's War on Cancer, launched in 1971, was producing results, but also because the 1970s ushered in a new disease regime, according to the definition provided by sociologist Martin Claviter. So a regime of biomedicalization characterized by the separation of diagnosis and surgery, by the introduction of mammographic screening, and by the introduction of systemic treatments such as chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, however, posed the problem of resistance. So tamoxifen quickly transitioned from the metastatic to the adjuvant setting between the late 1970s and the early 80s. However, the company, the producers of tamoxifen, had to wait until 1985 to be granted a patent for the drug in the United States. So in the early 1990s, the breast cancer prevention trial, a double-blind randomized controlled trial of tamoxifen versus placebo, enrolling women in over 324 sites in the United States and Canada, was started by the United States National Cancer Institute. In 1998, tamoxifen was granted approval by the FDA for women, for using women considered at high risk of breast cancer. In the meantime, though, reports concerning serious side effects, such as blood clots, cataracts, liver cancer in rats, and endometrial adenocarcinoma in women, had started to emerge, prompting Breast Cancer Action to take action against the marketing of tamoxifen as a preventative, and more generally against so-called chemoprevention. And after years of work on these issues, Breast Cancer Action also started a coalition with other health grassroots organizations, which they called Prevention First. The regime of biomedicalization, which I just mentioned, provided the breeding ground for the birth in the 1990s of a breast cancer movement whose more political fraction was represented by groups such as Breast Cancer Action. So three of the founders of BCA, Eleanor Pratt, Susan Claymon, and Linda Reyes, met through a support group for women with metastatic breast cancer living in San Francisco. The fourth founder, Belle Shayer, met Eleanor Pratt at a retreat for people with different forms of cancer and also at different stages, organized by a center specialized in holistic healing. So these four women invited other people to join them at Eleanor Pratt's home on July the 1st, 1990, to organize Breast Cancer Action. And as they stated in the flyer announcing their first meeting, which you can see in the slide, our goals are education and political action to prevent a further rise in the incidence of breast cancer. Indeed, we hope that our efforts will serve in the future to lower the breast cancer rate in the United States. So besides the change in the breast cancer disease regime, the roots of BCA are to be found in the history of social movements in the United States in the second half of the 20th century. And the figure of Eleanor Pratt is illustrative of these links. In this picture, taken in Miami during the Republican convention in 1972, you can see Eleanor Pratt. She's the woman with curly hairs wearing two camera around her neck. So she's protesting with the feminist contingent, and she was, before joining the feminist movement, she had also been involved in the civil rights and the anti-war movement. So as pointed out by historian Nancy Toms, health issues at the state and the state of American medicine became a fil rouge tying together the several parts of the protest movement of which Pratt was part, with many others of her generation. Concerns over healthcare, especially in the reproductive sphere, were shared by women who met through feminist conscious raising groups of larger gatherings, leading to the emergence of the women's health movement. The main targets of the movement were physicians' authority and paternalism, as well as the whole medical system profiting from women's bodies. However, not only practices, but medical technologies were proved to be sources of potential harm and became objects of distrust. So two cases are the most well-known, the contraceptive pill and the case of detilsilbestrol, also known as DES. Now, of course, for time reasons, I don't have time to delve into these two cases. But here it will suffice to say that in December 1975, a memorial service for all the victims of DES, the pill, and synthetic estrogens took place on the steps of the FDA in Maryland, marking the birth of the National Women's Health Network, whose founders were women like Barbara Seaman, Alice Wolfson, Belita Cowan, and others who had been deeply involved in the contraceptive pill and DES scandals. And they established that the organization would never accept money from the pharmaceutical industry. So when in 1990, months before BCA was set up, the US National Cancer Institute announced the breast cancer prevention trial, the network declared its opposition to it. The network supported the use of tamoxifen in women diagnosed with breast cancer, but they found that the administration of a drug with known or highly suspected toxicities to healthy women was just unacceptable. So as network member Adrienne Fu Berman noted in a 1991 article published in The Lancet, the NCI was offering women disease substitution rather than disease prevention. Now, the notion of prevention is key here, since in the course of the 20th century, there have been two different approaches to cancer prevention. One privileging treatment, whose efficacy was correlated to the timing of detection, and another focusing on reducing the exposure to environmental and lifestyle hazards. While in the 1960s and the 1970s, had witnessed what David Cantor has defined a reinvention of the interest in the environmental and lifestyle causes of cancer based on statistics and risk calculation. In the 1980s, the balance shifted back towards therapeutic prevention, and in the case of breast cancer, in the form of chemoprevention. So BCA opposed chemoprevention of breast cancer through tamoxifen and more generally chemoprevention of breast cancer to cure. In the early 1990s, they strictly collaborated with the National Women's Health Network to try to stop the trial or at least to convince the NCI to postpone it. Their efforts, however, were unsuccessful, so the trial was launched in April 1992. It was plagued by congressional hearings, scandals, new evidence about side effects of tamoxifen, including endometrial cancer in women, the listing of tamoxifen as a carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer and by the state of California. In the meantime, Breast Cancer Action kept their members updated not only on tamoxifen and its use in the adjuvant setting, but also on tamoxifen in the context of the breast cancer prevention trial. But the group also campaigned on the connections between environmental pollution, the pharmaceutical industry, and breast cancer. So in October 1993, on the occasion of National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, BCA then President Nancy Evans explained in an article for the group's newsletter that besides being the producer of Nolvadex, the brand name of tamoxifen, IC, that by then had become Zeneca, was among the world's leading producer, among the leading producers of organochlorines. And here I'm quoting from Evans' article, chlorine-based industrial chemicals whose end products can range from DDT, PCBs, and Agent Orange, and associated with increased incidence of breast cancer. In addition, Zeneca was the founder of National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which in Evan's view meant that National Breast Cancer Awareness Month meant more awareness of breast cancer, which in turn meant more mammograms, which in turn meant more diagnosis of breast cancer, which in turn meant more prescriptions for Nolvadex. So in 1998, BCA, by then led by former attorney Barbara Brenner, diagnosed with breast cancer in 1993 at age 41, adopted the policy of not accepting donations from corporate polluters and from the pharmaceutical industry. In the same year, the breast cancer prevention trial was suddenly ended 14 months ahead of schedule. And in the June-July 1998 issue of BCA's newsletter, Brenner brought to the reader's attention what the organization deemed to be wrong about the trial. So Brenner acknowledged that tamoxifen worked to treat metastatic disease and to reduce the risk of recurrence in the healthy breast in women diagnosed with breast cancer. But she also pointed out that the drug was a known carcinogen. More generally, though, Brenner's main point was to invite the public to ask again and again why it is that when we demand true prevention for breast cancer, the answer we are offered is a pill. Such invitation was made even more urgent by the news reported by media as the newsletter was going to the press that raloxifene, a new drug for osteoporosis, could soon replace the use of tamoxifen in healthy women because it did not increase the risk of endometrial cancer. So by the end of October of 1998, tamoxifen was granted approval by the FDA to reduce the incidence of breast cancer in women at high risk for breast cancer. So initially, however, Zeneca had asked the FDA to allow the marketing of Nolvadex as a preventative agent for the reduction of breast cancer. The company specified that, and I'm quoting here, the term prevention indicates reduction in incidence or risk of invasive breast cancer over the period of time of the breast cancer prevention trial, and does not necessarily imply that the initiation of breast cancer has been prevented or that the tumors have been permanently eliminated. So BCA labeled this definition Orwellian, urging the FDA, together with other women's health groups, to reject it, something which the agency did. So after getting approval for the new indication for tamoxifen, Zeneca started an aggressive direct-to-consumer advertising campaign to promote its product. And this campaign was favored by the new guidelines on advertising issued by the FDA in 1997. And an example of this campaign is their 1999 Meets TV advert that, according to the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, by December 2000, generated more than 700,000 calls to the toll-free number provided in the advert from people interested in receiving more information. And I would like now to show you the advert, just so that you can have an idea of what we're talking about. And I would like to know if you can see it. Can you see it?
No, I can't see it.
Oh, so maybe say, okay, new share here. Now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is the ad.
There's no sound. Can you turn on the sound? Oh.
Oh, it's turned on. You can hear it?
No, unless somebody else can.
Oh, let me check the chat. No, no sound. Oh, well, it can be my computer that. No, I don't know what to do. So I guess we can leave it there. Wow. Yeah, it was just to give you an idea of what the campaign was about, but it wasn't just a TV campaign. There were adverts also in the press, and it was a kind of quite aggressive campaign. So can you see the PowerPoint now again?
Yes.
Okay. So the marketing campaign for Novadex generated concern and complaints to the FDA by Breast Cancer Action and the National Women's Health Network too, and prompted Breast Cancer Action to address the issue from a broader perspective, so not just that of breast cancer. So in 2002, BCA started a coalition called Prevention First, aiming to shift the emphasis in disease prevention away from drugs, medical products, and procedures that may pose serious risk to human health toward true prevention of illness by reclaiming our right to safe water, air, and food. And in order to reach this goal, the coalition planned to contrast, and I'm quoting here, the advertising of prescription drugs, especially when the ads are false and misleading, to keep the public informed about the side effects and limits of prevention pills, to bring to the attention of the public opinion the problem arising by the tendency to treat a risk factor as though it were a disease, to promote a view of public health that stresses primary prevention, and to raise awareness of the precautionary principle in health. So my conclusions, my tentative conclusions, are that the opposition of BCA and of the Prevention First coalition to what they refer to as prevention pills or chemoprevention forms part of the long history of clashes between a strictly medical approach to cancer prevention, privileging therapeutics, and one emphasizing the causes of the disease to be found in the environment and in the social determinants of lifestyle. Such opposition was also firmly rooted in the women's health movement of the 1970s, and particularly in its distrust of the medicalization of women's bodies and lives. There are, however, some important differences with respect to the past. BCA's focus on breast cancer is linked to the fragmentation and narrowing of a larger social movement, the women's health movement, and its transformation into a set of single-issue groups. In turn, this phenomenon should be read against the backdrop of the almost uncontested and visible control, or to use a category invoked recently among others by Jean-Paul Gaultier, hegemony by the industry, characterizing Western medicine and society since the 1980s. In the course of the last decades, according to Jeremy Green, the turning of, quote, disease into a simultaneously epidemiological event and a marketing event, unquote, has become evident. The actors involved in this process include the most conspicuous disease-based organizations, among which mainstream breast cancer foundations and groups that in many cases accept donations from the pharmaceutical industry constitute a model for other disease constituencies. The work carried out by BCA against the chemoprevention of the disease affecting the subpopulation it represented, and to promote a drugless strategy to prevent it, but ultimately also benefiting the health of the general population, sets the group with the minority of those who are trying to resist the process Greens refers to. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was very, very, what's the word? Sorry, can you see me? Oh, I thought I'd start, sorry. Sorry, thank you very much indeed. It was very, very interesting. And indeed, it's part of, like, if I look at grand rounds that we used to have about 10, 15 years ago, they were all sponsored by drug companies, all of them. Whereas now, about 8 years ago, it was all stopped. And I think that's happening across many medical schools. And indeed, the sort of free trips that doctors would get to, I don't know, I never actually got to go there, New York City and 3 nights of opera or wherever you went, actually have become illegal now, and you can't do it in Canada, or at least I don't know anyone who does do it. But it's all part of the same idea, whereby you are unknowingly being bribed to prescribe expensive drugs. So I'm very pleased to see how it went with women's health. Do we have questions?
I can see in the chat a suggestion from Shara, which looks very useful.
Oh, you can see it and I can't. How interesting. so maybe you could read it out.
Yeah, if you haven't come across her yet, here is the citation for Boodle's dissertation on tamoxifen. Margaret Boodle, 2004, codes identities and pathologies in the construction of tamoxifen as a chemoprophylactic for breast cancer risk reduction in healthy women at high risk. No, I haven't seen it, and thank you very much, Shara. I'm sure this is very interesting and relevant and useful.
I guess Shara, vote to you as opposed to everybody, so I couldn't see it. Is there anybody else that you have there?
No, I have no one else in the chat.
Well, I can't believe there aren't any questions. Maybe they all want their coffee break.
No worries.
So we have Rachel who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, so I was interested in this opposition to the drug and the fact that it's a preventative drug. And I was wondering, I'm thinking about mammography and whether there was any pushback against that as well, or the frequency with which it was being done, or because I was curious about how much of the opposition is related to the side effects of the drug, which seem obvious and serious, and how much of it is maybe related also to this kind of growth of the risk category. Like I'm thinking of Robert Aronowitz's work, obviously here. But yeah, the question's about mammography, I guess.
Yeah. No, there was, well, at the beginning, well, from the get-go, even Eleanor Pratt, the founder of Breast Cancer Action, who died, the organization was started in 1990. She died in October 1991, so pretty soon. But she, in interviews, she used to say that mammography is what we have, she used to say, but it's not prevention, it's just early detection, which she considered what we have, so useful in some sense, but she and the rest of the founders demanded more research into the causes, into the root causes of the disease. And then as the evidence on, well, the evidence on the carcinogenic effect of radiation was already known, but as evidence on the risk connected to mammographic screening, such as the risk, for example, of overdiagnosis, came up, Breast Cancer Action started to at least to inform the public and their members about the the risks of overdiagnosis and the fact that early detection does not mean prevention, because this was one of the biggest problems with mammographic screening, that for example, through National Breast Cancer Awareness Months and other big, huge breast cancer foundations used to promote mammography as prevention, whereas Breast Cancer Action used to remark that was just early detection. So it was very different from prevention, and early detection didn't mean necessarily long-term survival from breast cancer. So yeah, they surely were trying to emphasize that there was a lot of hype surrounding mammographic screening too.
So there's another question. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I specifically, since it's hardcore medicine going towards my direction. So, I mean, I'm always fascinated with all the things about mammography, whether you should have it, whether you shouldn't have it. And of course, a lot of it is actually based to money. And of course, what the rewards are. So thank you. So Charlotte, where are you?
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I guess my question is in relation more to how did the impact of testing for genetic mutations such as BRCA1, BRCA2, how did that affect the whole discussion surrounding breast cancer prevention?
Of course, yeah, there was some, especially when the discovery of the BRCA genes came up. And since then, I guess there still is some confusion between being at risk of breast cancer, being at high risk of breast cancer, and the risk connected with an inherited genetic mutation. So that was, Breast Cancer Action tried to keep the two things separated. So in the case of tamoxifen, when we talk about high risk, and also the women who were enrolled in the breast cancer prevention trial, they were not mutation carriers. They were considered at high risk according to a model that had been developed by, at first by the NCI, the Gale model. Dr. Gale was an NCI statistician. And then the Gale model was modified for the purpose of the trial. So basically, and then a threshold was established to be enrolled. And the threshold was much lower than the threshold established by the Gale model to be considered at high risk. And there's a very interesting article by Johnny Foskett, who used to be at McGill years ago, about the Gale model and this social construction of being at high risk for breast cancer. And in this case, it doesn't have anything to do with the risk connected with being a mutation carrier. But there still is a lot of confusion, on all this, on these technicalities. And sometimes it's also difficult, for example, to distinguish, especially when talking to medical practitioners, whether, they, sometimes they mess things a bit up, because these are very new, very recent things. For example, all these discoveries about the BRCA genes, and maybe when they were at uni during their training, these things were unknown, and so they have not been trained to know these things and to pass this information onto their patients. And I don't know what Dr. MacNamara, what Elizabeth thinks about this.
Well, I actually probably come from a different perspective vis-a-vis many physicians. So I feel very strongly that, I mean, because one of the things I work in palliative care, and that's one of the reasons I'm really interested in the dialysis thing this afternoon, is that I see people to the moment they die being promised, you know, this could work, this may work, and these things are costing like 10,000, 20,000 a month. And, you know, they're sitting there, and I'm just, this is possibly not what you wanted as an answer, but I see them suffering appallingly because of these stories that are often told, which are completely wrong. So instead of them being allowed, and again, being Irish, we often have, we have a very strong relationship with death and dying, and we see it as normal, which makes us unique. But the truth is, you know, I feel very strongly that the last few months of your life are months that you should be making memories together, that the people who live after you can look back and think it is wonderful. So I actually feel very strongly about the fact that we don't teach doctors to really discuss risk, to really discuss what it means, to really discuss, like, we have a patient coming soon, and this would be my person who's going to get transfused 3 times a week. They have no white cells, they have no red cells. And essentially by constantly transfusing the person, we are deciding that they will die of a massive infection or a massive bleed. So we're sort of saying, like, we can help you with constant transfusions, but we're not telling them what they're paying for it. I'm just talking emotionally, I'm not talking money-wise. And so I really feel that, you know, doctors need to, I mean, we're too focused on one area. So you will get oncologists who know 10 times more than me, 100 times more than me, but that they will still, they still are sort of in that sort of, I don't know, tunnel, that they see things. And again, this is what bring me back to why I was so thrilled to listen to both of you and to listen to the speakers yesterday. And the problem I know is if you were talking to doctors, 90% of them would just poo-poo you away as being, yeah, they're humanities. But there has to be a way to be able to take a lot of what you're all saying from yesterday and today and put it into a medical terminology that they can understand and grasp, and that they understand that there is a certain amount of harm. You know, my secretary was on tamoxifen for like 15 years. And I tried talking to her about it, but the fact that her oncologist had put her on it, she would never come off. And she had like a small little tumor that had spread nowhere, that was just, I mean, there was no question that she would do anything else. So when I hear you and I hear you talking, I'm not even sure if she could hear what you were saying. Like, I mean, to me, the problem I have is that people can't hear what most of you are saying. Doctors and public. Maybe it's not what you wanted to have as an answer.
No.
I'm afraid you froze.
And that's a huge problem. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, maybe I've, you know, sometimes I try to think about possible solutions, and I don't know if maybe if future doctors could study medical anthropology, medical history at uni, and afterwards maybe we might hope they could have a different perspective, or also thanatology, for example, because there is this refusal by many doctors to accept that death exists, and it's not their fault. No, it's their training. Yeah, it's just nature.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is their training, and I think the problem is again, this is what I would go back to, is the fact that surgeons don't learn medicine, they learn surgery. Like, we've actually changed the entire way physicians were trained. So the year before, 2 years before I started doing medicine in Trinity in Dublin, you actually had to do 1 year. This was the old way of training in the humanities. Which in actual fact is, I just thought was phenomenal. You know, you could choose anything you wanted to, but you actually had to do 1 year in the humanities. And I think it just brought out better trained doctors. And I think the fact that we get rewarded for up to the minute knowledge appropriately. We get rewarded for being correct and understanding all the trials and guidelines, but we don't get rewarded for teaching and being with patients as human beings. I mean, we get personal reward, but that's not part of our training.
Yeah.
Or to understand the complexity of the arguments against it. So you making an arguments like the two of you today making the arguments, whether it was about toxic shock. So I learned about toxic shock as what is it? It's Staph aureus. This is why it's due to it. I mean, the suggestion was that women weren't washing their hands before they were inserting tampons. Like, it was a very, we learned it in a very medical way. I never learned anything about the fights to actually prevent Procter & Gamble actually getting access to data. So there has to be a way we can find to actually have physicians and nurses understand more. Like I'm not sure how to do it, but I know it should be one of the goals of this meeting, of these meetings. So on that, I shall finish and say thank you to all of you. I am truly very sorry that you're not here. I would love to meet you and chat to you. Any of you who are coming to Montreal, please let me know, because now that everything's opened up, we can certainly go to a terrace and have a drink and do Montreal things. So really, really thank you all very much. And thank you to Thomas and Rachel for setting up such a wonderful meeting.